Hey everyone, I hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak on either the Nintendo Switch or PC as we continue to wait for the free title update in September. And in this video, I want to try to have a discussion topic regarding White Espinas and everything that we know about it, and more importantly, why Capcom decided to go with Brown Espinas, aka Flaming Espinas, instead of White Espinas. I think this monster would have been an amazing addition to the roster of Sunbreak, which already has had some really interesting additions, but more importantly, I've seen a lot of people show discontent or not necessarily be too thrilled that Flaming Espinas was the one chosen, since it essentially looks extremely similar to normal Espinas while still being very unique on its very own. This is something that we've kind of already gone over in the reveal trailer, but I'm also going to be talking about all the monsters available for free title update number 2 in a future video, and there I hope to showcase why Brown Espinas justifies its position as a new monster. But in this video, I certainly want to focus on just White Espinas and why I think Capcom decided to look it over. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction as to what this monster usually was when it was introduced in Frontiers Season 5.5. Remember that Brown Espinas / Flaming Espinas was introduced in Frontiers version 2.5. So this monster was actually considered something of an iteration to Brown Espinas at that time, and also it was way more dangerous than Brown Espinas and just base level Espinas as well. And if you're wondering why I'm saying actually Brown Espinas, is because at the time that was what that monster was. Flaming was not actually a thing. And another thing worth keeping in mind is that Flaming Espinas seems to be a completely reworked version of Brown Espinas. There's a reason why I say that. We're going to go over that in another video, but it's not going to be the same original thing that we had back in the day. Also, you should be seeing some gameplay here being shown on the screen, at the very least some clips. Thanks, huge shout out to Narwa, who actually updated these a few years ago. These are high quality clips from Frontier Z, so certainly huge shout out to them. Link in the description below for about a 17 minute hunt, I should say, that they had. And I just want to showcase just some of the interesting attacks that monster had in that specific hunt with a Brown Espinas as well in that same arena, as I go over some of the interesting details that I think are worth noting. We do know that this was, of course, a subspecies. Most of the Espinas at the time were considered just subspecies, but it was a rare subspecies amongst that as well. So it could easily fall into the free title update number 2 discussion that we could have had if this monster was set to be released and included for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. And while it was a fire elemental monster, it could also give you the typical poison attack, a paralyzing, and even defense down, as it hits you with a typical firebolt just like a basic Espinas. Now do remember that even defense down being added in, that's also that Flaming Espinas will have that same effect as well. So this is something that they actually shared in common, as they were pretty similar monsters in Frontiers. With that said, one of the biggest differentiators was that White Espinas was weak to dragon attacks, where Flaming Espinas is weak to water elemental attacks. And while the white underbelly of it and the silver armor and its purple thorns may differentiate it visually, there are other things that can make it stand out aside from just visuals. Essentially, since it was kind of like a normal Espinas that it would constantly be sleeping whenever you started a hunt, unlike a normal Espinas and a Flaming Espinas, whenever you wake it up, it auto enrages right out of the gate. Also, unlike a normal Espinas and presumably a Flaming Espinas, but certainly differently than a Brown Espinas at the time, and again, I'm treating Brown and Flaming as two separate creatures, but I know they kind of aren't. White Espinas stayed off the ground a whole heck of a lot more than any other Espinas at the time, and presumably Flaming Espinas as well. So it's also much more agile than any of the other Espinas, as it had a lot of flaming attacks that would actually just keep it off of the ground entirely. So while it did stay on the ground for a certain amount of attacks, a lot of the attacks ultimately ended up with it flying all across the air. Another thing that also made it stand out, that while poison was one of the biggest features that it had, like a normal Espinas, in a single blow or a fire blast, it would actually have a more fire-based set of attacks. One of which, and this is something that you should have already been seeing in one of the clips, that it would set the entire ground on fire with its fire breath attacks, where basically the damage of the fire itself, if you decided to stand on it for whatever reason, was actually doubled than any normal attack would actually strike you with Fire Blight. So not only did it have these fiery infernos that it would create pretty much out of nowhere, but it also had the ability to poison you as well. So not only would you be poisoned and standing on the fire, but also be set ablaze, taking in twice as damage whenever these fires are all over the ground. So it was really nasty stuff. And the craziness doesn't actually end there. There were in Frontiers something called a hardcore version of monsters. These were pretty much like tougher versions that were a little bit more visually different, but they were also just tougher all-around encounters for that specific game. And White Espinas had a hardcore version of itself as well, which is the one that you should have been seeing on the thumbnail and the image on the screen right now. This hardcore White Espinas has a darker hue, bigger thorns, and of course it came with brand new attacks. One of the biggest featured brand new attacks was a breathing poison ability that turned into puddles all over the ground and blazing tornadoes to send the fire and the poison together into a spinning mass. So it essentially was one of those like runaway attacks or get killed instantly. That game featured a lot of that crazy stuff, so hardcore monsters and specifically hardcore White Espinas were certainly something worth fearing. So you might be asking yourself, why isn't all this awesome goodness and this great monster not part of Sunbreak? And honestly, I think they're just introducing Frontiers monsters slowly. They certainly don't want the rollout to be something that they are kind of like rushing through. And while I think Sunbreak might just be the beginning of the addition of Frontiers monsters, is certainly not going to be the end. So I would actually wager that something along the lines of Monster Hunter 6, Monster Hunter World 2, whatever that next mainline game is just going to have more of a continuation of more Frontiers monsters and a better chance to see a White Espinas sub-rare species being introduced for that specific game. They basically are doing the same rollout that they did for Frontiers. Normal Espinas, brown/flaming Espinas, and then presumably White Espinas, with the understanding that Zenith Espinas could be potentially following whatever that next game is, or even as free DLC for the whatever expansion is going to be for Monster Hunter 6, World 2, whatever they end up calling it. So that's actually my guess. It's not necessarily one that you might have actually wanted to hear, but I think that's the reality of it. I think they're most likely just going to start taking in the Frontiers monster and slowly start to trickle them into the mainline games, as they don't necessarily want to waste all of them in just one specific game. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to actually just skip over Brown Espinas when they could have just completely reworked it like we think they are actually doing, and providing us with a reason as to why we're going to be fighting that monster in the first place. Another thing you should have been seeing already is also the weapons and the armors as well. The two different versions of the armor. The first armor that you actually got to see was just for normal White Espinas, but then the other really cool looking armor, especially for the female hunter, was actually that hardcore version of White Espinas as well, which had some really awesome armors. It would have been great to actually see them added into Sunbreak, but again, I think Capcom's reasoning at the end of the day will just be slow rollout of these Frontier monsters, which there's plenty of them. That is the thing. Not only that, but Monster Hunter Explorer as well, this would be the mobile game, which I've talked about multiple times as well, had a bunch of brand new monsters and also special species monsters, which we originally thought would be added into Sunbreak, as the original descriptions mentioned that, but it turned out to be variants. There's just a lot of monsters there in both Monster Hunter Explorer and Frontiers that they could easily just repurpose and add in as just fodder monsters, or things that we just simply have not been able to see in a long time. Remember that Frontiers was like 2008-ish, so you know, it's been a long time since these monsters have not seen the light of day, and Capcom certainly just wants the slow rollout to continue as they bring them back into the fold. I am going to be working on another video where I do want to specifically talk about pretty much all the free title update number 2 monsters specifically that we know of, and some of the details, some of the new details that we've been getting our hands on regarding that as well, as I already spoke about the Afflicted Hunt monsters, 6-star Afflicted Investigation quest and 7-star Afflicted Investigation quest that are coming to free title update number 3 as well. I'm going to leave a link in the description below If for whatever reason you did not check out that video, check it out. There's plenty of good details there as well. But that's about all the information that I have for you guys regarding White Espinas and why I think they're not being introduced into Sunbreak, which ultimately I think it's a bummer, but I certainly would have loved to see more of this monster going forward. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.